Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the UNS Defiant when the alarm system suddenly came to life. His officer Amy Clark looked up from her station with wide eyes and called out that something massive had just appeared on their sensors. Jake felt his heart beat faster, because this was the moment humanity had been preparing for. After decades of searching the stars, they had finally found someone else out there. He ordered his crew to battle stations and told the communications team to prepare their first contact messages. The view screen flickered and showed an enormous alien ship that looked like a floating palace covered in purple metal and decorated with strange artistic patterns. The alien who appeared on screen was tall and thin, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond shape on its elongated head. Its skin was pale blue, and it wore a uniform covered in so many metals that Jake wondered how it could stand up straight. The alien spoke in a voice that the translator converted perfectly into English. It announced itself as High Commander Velrax of the Imperial warship Eternal Glory, and said that humans had entered territory belonging to the Zefraxi sovereignty. The alien demanded that the human ship prepare to be boarded for inspection or face destruction. Jake introduced himself politely and said that humanity came in peace and wanted to establish diplomatic relations. The alien commander ignored this and began listing all the powerful weapons his ship possessed. Velrax talked about gravitic disruptors and plasma cascade weapons and quantum-shielded armor. He said these weapons had conquered 47 species across 12 star systems. Jake listened carefully while Amy ran scans of the alien vessel. After a few minutes, Amy turned to Jake with a strange expression on her face. She quietly reported that the alien's quantum-shielded armor was actually just a decorative crystal layer that would shatter if hit by anything solid. Jake felt his eyebrows rise in surprise. Amy continued scanning and discovered that the alien reactor was producing only 1/3 the power of human fusion cores. The massive alien warship was actually running on less energy than the Defiant. Jake asked what a gravitic disruptor was, and the alien commander seemed pleased to explain. He said it was a weapon that manipulated gravity to crush enemy ships, like insects. Amy frantically worked her console and then looked at Jake with disbelief. She reported that the gravitic disruptor was actually just a weak tractor beam that could barely move a small asteroid. It would be completely useless against any real armor. Jake felt a laugh building in his chest and had to force his face to stay neutral. He asked about the plasma cascade weapons. Amy checked and reported that they were particle accelerators that operated at temperatures humans used for industrial welding. The human hull could withstand hours of fire from these weapons without any real damage. The situation was becoming absurd. Jake looked at the huge alien warship and the proud, decorated commander and realized something incredible. Humanity had just met a galactic empire that had somehow achieved faster-than-light travel, but had completely forgotten how to build actual weapons. The alien technology was elegant and efficient, but it was designed for everything except fighting. Jake carefully told the commander that humanity must respectfully decline the boarding request. He suggested a diplomatic meeting instead. Velrax seemed angry and said humans did not understand how much danger they were in. The alien ordered his weapons officer to fire on some nearby asteroids to demonstrate their power. A pale blue beam shot out from the Eternal Glory and hit one of the smaller space rocks. The asteroid glowed slightly as its surface heated up, but nothing else happened. The rock remained completely intact. There was a long moment of silence on the Defiant bridge. Jake saw his weapons, Officer Chris Murphy, covering his mouth with his hand, and his shoulders were shaking. The navigation officer Betty Ward had turned her chair away and was staring at her boots. Jake told the alien commander that the demonstration was very impressive. Amy leaned over and whispered that human point defense lasers had 50 times more power than what they had just seen. Jake quickly told her not to mention that. Velrax looked satisfied with his demonstration and again demanded that the humans surrender. Jake took a deep breath and made a decision. He proposed that humans show their own capabilities as a demonstration of mutual respect. He suggested they could then discuss terms as equals rather than as conqueror and conquered. The alien commander seemed curious and agreed. He said it would be amusing to see what primitive human technology could do. Jake nodded to his weapons officer and told him to use standard point defense settings. He specifically said not to show off too much. Chris Murphy targeted the same asteroid cluster and fired when ready. The human lasers fired without any dramatic buildup or glowing charge sequence. In just over 2 seconds, 17 asteroids simply ceased to exist. They were vaporized into clouds of gas and tiny particles that quickly dispersed into space. On the view screen, High Commander Velrax stood completely frozen. All 4 of his eyes were wide with shock. Behind him, other alien crew members had stopped moving and were staring at their displays. Velrax tried to speak but seemed unable to find words. He asked how humans had done that. Jake casually explained that it was just their point defense system for shooting down small threats like incoming missiles. He added that it was designed to handle the small stuff. Amy suddenly reported that 7 more alien ships were arriving. Multiple vessel types were forming a blockade around the human ship. Jake sighed and ordered red alert status. He told Chris to prepare weapons, but not to fire unless given direct orders. He told Amy to analyze every ship that appeared because if they were about to start humanity's first interstellar incident, he wanted to know exactly what they were facing. The alarm klaxons sounded throughout the Defiant as crew members rushed to their stations. Jake sat back in his chair and thought about how strange this situation was. The United Nations had prepared detailed protocols for first contact. They had trained for scenarios where humans met advanced civilizations. They had worried about being outmatched or misunderstood, but nobody had prepared for the possibility that humanity would meet a galactic empire whose fearsome warships were less dangerous than a police boat. Jake knew his report to Earth would be very interesting to write. He watched as more alien vessels appeared on his tactical display and wondered how this day could possibly get any stranger. 7 alien warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation around the Defiant. Jake had to admit that their coordination was impressive, even if their weapons were not. Amy reported that the ships included 4 cruisers, 2 destroyers, and 1 massive dreadnought that was 15 times larger than the human vessel. The tactical display showed that the aliens had positioned themselves to create a complete spherical blockade with no gaps. From a strategic perspective, it was a textbook encirclement maneuver. From a practical perspective, it was like being surrounded by aggressive butterflies. The view screen activated and showed a new alien who wore an even more elaborate uniform than Commander Velrax. This one had a crown-like decoration on its head, and its uniform seemed to be made of color-shifting metallic threads. The new alien introduced itself as Grand Admiral Thessar of the Imperial Dreadnought, Absolute Dominion. He was the supreme commander of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. Thessar said that humans had refused lawful orders and demonstrated weapons that were barbaric and concerning. He demanded an immediate explanation. Jake stood and straightened his uniform. He explained with respect that humanity had entered no territory they recognized as claimed. They came from a region of space, not marked on any charts. They had fired only at uninhabited asteroids at Commander Velrax's invitation. Thessar said, "The efficiency of human weapons suggested a violent and aggressive culture." He explained that the Zefroxy sovereignty had maintained peace for 3 centuries by ensuring no species possessed threatening weapons. Jake muttered that it was peace through superior firepower. Thessar agreed and said exactly that without catching the ironic tone in Jake's voice. The Grand Admiral stated that humans must submit to inspection or his fleet would neutralize their vessel. He claimed to have 17 ships under his command, with the finest military technology available. Amy pulled up data on her screen and turned to Jake with an expression of mixed disbelief and horror. She silently showed him a complete analysis of the alien fleet, based on passive scans. Jake read the information and his eyes went wide. The alien warships used reactor technology that humanity had abandoned 60 years ago. Their weapons were less powerful than industrial tools used in Earth shipyards. Their engines were efficient for long-distance travel but terrible for combat maneuvering. Their fancy armor added weight without providing any real protection. Jake handed the data back to Amy and returned his attention to the view screen. He tried to explain that humanity had no desire for conflict. They were explorers, not conquerors. However, they could not submit to inspection without proper diplomatic protocols. Thessar responded flatly that humans had chosen destruction. He ordered all ships to charge weapons and target the human vessel. He told his fleet to concentrate fire on the propulsion systems to cripple the ship for boarding. Chris called out from the weapons station that 17 alien vessels were powering up their weapons. They were coordinating their targeting solutions. Jake felt his stomach tighten, because he did not want to start an interstellar war. But he also could not let his ship and crew be captured by aliens, who massively overestimated their military power. Jake ordered his crew to maintain a defensive posture only. If the aliens fired, they should target only weapons systems and disable rather than destroy. Amy began recording everything because if the situation went badly, Earth would need a complete record. On the view screen, Thessar raised one long-fingered hand and gave the order to fire. 17 alien warships opened fire at once. Pale blue particle beams and missile-like projectiles converged on the Defiant from every direction. Jake braced himself for impact. But then something unexpected happened. Actually, nothing happened at all. The particle beams hit the human hull and simply dispersed without causing any damage. They heated the outer armor by a few degrees. The kinetic projectiles struck with impacts that felt like tennis balls being thrown weakly. The ship barely registered the attack. Jake called for a damage report even though he already suspected the answer. The engineering officer, Sam Phillips, checked his displays and reported no damage at all. The hull temperature had increased by 3 degrees in targeted sections. The kinetic weapons had not even scratched the paint. Jake looked back at the view screen where Grand Admiral Thessar was staring at something off-screen with all 4 eyes stretched wide. The Grand Admiral breathed that it was impossible. No species had ever withstood concentrated fire from a sovereignty fleet. He demanded to know what kind of shielding humans possessed. Jake answered honestly that they had no shields. The protection came from standard hull armor made of titanium ceramic composite with ablative coating. There was a very long silence. Jake could see other aliens moving frantically in the background of the transmission. They were apparently checking their weapon systems and confirming that yes, they had fired, and no, they had not accomplished anything. Thessar spoke slowly with his commanding tone, completely changed to something approaching cautious respect. He suggested that perhaps they should discuss diplomatic protocols. After all, Jake agreed that would be wise. Amy leaned over and whispered that she was picking up communications between the alien vessels. Their fleet commander was ordering all ships to cease fire and maintain defensive positions. The aliens were calling humans a Category 7 combat threat. Jake asked what that meant. Amy said she did not know. But based on context, she thought it meant the aliens were terrified. Jake sat back in his chair and tried to process this information. Humanity had left Earth expecting to be newcomers taking their first steps into a community of advanced civilizations. Instead, they had discovered they were apparently the most dangerous military force in the local region. They had achieved this status entirely by accident, through practical engineering. Jake opened a channel to all alien vessels. He announced that humanity had no hostile intentions toward the sovereignty or any peaceful species. However, they would defend themselves if attacked. He proposed an immediate ceasefire and the beginning of formal diplomatic negotiations. Thessar appeared on screen again, with his entire demeanor transformed. He accepted the terms on behalf of the Zefraxi sovereignty. He admitted that perhaps they had judged human intentions too hastily. It was not every day they encountered a species with such advanced capabilities. Chris muttered from his station that apparently humans had advanced weapons too. Jake shot him a warning look and returned his attention to the Grand Admiral. He said he was glad they could resolve this peacefully and asked about establishing diplomatic protocols. The two sides began the delicate process of formal first contact procedures. Jake could not shake the feeling that humanity's entrance onto the galactic stage would be far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The complication was not because humanity was too weak to defend itself. The problem was that everyone else was weak compared to humans. The galaxy had apparently been living in a very long and comfortable period of peace. Military technology had stagnated centuries ago. Now humanity had arrived with weapons designed for brutal interstellar warfare and armor built to withstand impacts at incredible speeds. Jake made a mental note to recommend that future first contact missions include protocols for military restraint. The last thing humanity needed was a reputation as warmongers, even if their warships could vaporize anything in the local stellar neighborhood without effort. The neutral meeting ground was a diplomatic station orbiting a gas giant 3 systems away from where the confrontation had occurred. The station was a massive ring structure decorated with the same ornate style as the alien warships. As the Defiant approached, Jake admitted to himself that the aliens had excellent taste in architecture even if their weapons were pathetic. Amy reported that the station was a regular diplomatic hub with signatures from at least 30 other alien vessels. Multiple species used this place. Jake raised an eyebrow and commented that first contact with one civilization was complicated enough. Now they might meet several species at once. Amy and Jake prepared to leave the ship while Chris took command. Jake ordered Chris to get the ship home and report everything to Earth if anything went wrong. That was a direct order. Chris understood and told Jake to try not to start any wars. Jake said he made no promises. The docking procedure was smooth and precise. The airlock sealed perfectly, and atmospheric readings showed breathable air that was slightly richer in oxygen than Earth. When the airlock opened, a reception committee of 5 aliens waited for them. Only one was a member of the Zefraxi species. That one stepped forward, wearing a simpler uniform than the military officers. It introduced itself as Diplomatic Attaché Veril and said it would be their guide and translator. Jake thanked Veril and studied the other aliens with interest. One looked like a floating jellyfish, surrounded by an atmosphere bubble. Another was humanoid, but covered in crystalline plates. The other 2 were difficult to categorize. Veril led them through corridors that were decorated like art galleries. Every wall told stories through murals and patterns. The lighting was warm and designed for beauty as much as function. Amy commented that the station was beautiful. Veril's 4 eyes seemed to brighten with pleasure. He explained that Harmony Station was built 2 centuries ago as a symbol of unity among peaceful species. Every surface told part of their shared history. Jake asked thoughtfully how long the Zefraxi sovereignty had maintained peace in this region. Veril answered that it had been 347 years. Before that came the expansion wars, when his people first developed faster than light travel and met other species. There were many conflicts and much bloodshed, but wisdom prevailed, and they established codes of conduct that all civilized species followed. They entered a large circular chamber with a domed ceiling showing real-time stars outside. Around the chamber were seats designed for various body types. Grand Admiral Thessar sat at the head position, still wearing his elaborate uniform. Thessar stood and welcomed the humans. He told them to sit because they had much to discuss. Jake and Amy took their seats and found the adjustable chairs reasonably comfortable. Thessar introduced representatives from other species. Ambassador Krell was from the Torgoth Mining Collective and had crystalline plates. Counselor Wes was from the Darathi Union and looked like the jellyfish creature. 5 other representatives were present from different sovereign nations that were all part of the Harmony Accord. The introductions continued, and Jake tried to memorize each species' name. This information would be crucial for future relations. Thessar said they needed to discuss humanity's arrival, which raised many questions. Human weapons technology was far beyond anything encountered in this sector. Human defensive capabilities were equally impressive. This suggested either humans were extremely militaristic, or they came from a region where such capabilities were necessary. Jake exchanged glances with Amy and thought carefully about how much to reveal. He explained that humanity had never encountered another intelligent species until now. They developed technology in isolation, based on practical needs of exploring their solar system and eventually reaching the stars. They did not know what they might find, so they prepared for multiple possibilities, including hostile contact. Ambassador Krell leaned forward and said it seemed excessive to develop asteroid vaporizing weapons without knowing if enemies existed. Amy interjected that from humanity's perspective, it seemed prudent. Human history was filled with examples of the cost of being unprepared. They hoped for peaceful contact, but planned for the worst. Counselor West spoke, in a voice like wind chimes, that the translator converted. He said human caution was understandable but presented a problem. The Harmony Accord existed to prevent arms races and military escalation. All member species agreed to strict limitations on weapons development. The technology humans possessed violated these limitations by several orders of magnitude. Jake felt concerned and asked if that meant humanity could not join the accord because their weapons were too advanced. Thessar said the situation was complicated. They could not ask humans to disarm because that would be unreasonable and frankly impossible to enforce. However, human presence threatened the balance maintained for centuries. If one species possessed overwhelming military superiority, what prevented them from using it? Jake answered firmly that their ethics prevented it. Humanity had fought many wars among themselves and learned from those mistakes. They did not seek to conquer or dominate. They sought knowledge, cooperation, and mutual benefit. Another representative named Thas, who was reptilian, said that words were easy. The Zefraxi said similar things during the expansion wars before the current peace was established. Thessar looked somewhat embarrassed and admitted that was a different era when they were younger and less wise. Jake saw an opportunity and said the aliens had learned. They chose peace over conflict. They built this beautiful station as a symbol of unity. Humanity respected that and wanted to be part of this community rather than a threat to it. Amy pulled out a datapad and asked permission to share information about human history and culture. Perhaps that would help the aliens understand humanity's perspective. Over the next hour, Amy presented an overview of human civilization, including wars, peacekeeping efforts, the United Nations, and cooperative space programs. She emphasized humanity's diversity with hundreds of cultures and languages that learned to coexist on one planet. The alien representatives listened with genuine interest. When Amy finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Counselor West spoke and said humanity had achieved something remarkable, with unity from diversity and peace after conflict. But one thing troubled him. Human weapons technology was 3 centuries ahead of anything in this sector. How did humans advance so quickly? Jake grimaced because this was the question he had been dreading. He admitted honestly that they did not know they had advanced quickly. Humans had no frame of reference. Their technology developed at what seemed like a natural pace. They did not realize other species might have taken a different approach. Ambassador Krell asked what he meant by different approach. Amy carefully explained that alien reactors, weapons, and armor were all based on sound principles, but seemed optimized for efficiency and conservation rather than raw power or defensive capability. It was elegant engineering but not designed for warfare. Thessar's expression shifted, and he explained that after the expansion wars, the Harmony Accord included provisions limiting weapons research. They agreed that focusing on military technology had nearly destroyed several civilizations. They chose a different path with sustainable development, artistic expression, and cultural exchange. Jake said that was admirable, but it also left them vulnerable. What if humanity had been hostile? What if they arrived intending to conquer rather than explore? The silence in the chamber was heavy. Thessar said quietly that this question had kept him awake since their first encounter. Humans could conquer the entire sector if they wished. The aliens had no defense against human weapons. Their most powerful warships were toys compared to what humans described as a light explorer vessel. Jake leaned back and processed this information. He told the Grand Admiral that he gave his word that humanity had no interest in conquest. But he understood the concern. Trust must be earned, not demanded. He proposed a compromise. Humanity would agree to United Nations oversight of all military vessels in this sector. They would share technology, but not weapons. Things like reactor technology, materials science, and medical advances. In return, humans asked for membership in the Harmony Accord and the opportunity to prove they could be trusted neighbors. Amy looked surprised, but Jake kept his focus on the alien representatives. This was a gamble, but it was the only way to bridge the enormous gap between human capabilities and galactic norms. The representatives conferred among themselves in various languages. Jake watched and tried to gauge reactions. Finally, Thessar raised a hand for silence. He said the proposal had merit but could not be decided immediately. This required consultation with their governments. However, he thought he spoke for everyone when he said human intentions appeared honorable. They would recommend that humanity receive provisional observer status in the Harmony Accord, with full membership possible after a probationary period. Jake asked how long that would be. Thessar answered, 50 years. Jake managed not to choke and said that was quite a long time from a human perspective. Thessar said they must understand that these species think in terms of generations, not years. 50 years was considered quite rapid for such important decisions. 3 months after first contact, Jake found himself in a secure briefing room at United Nations headquarters in Geneva. He was surrounded by diplomats, military officials, and scientists. The mood was tense because Earth's governments had received his reports and reached a conclusion that nobody particularly liked. Humanity was now responsible for defending a galactic sector that did not want to be defended. Secretary General Liu Wei was a stern woman in her 60s who ran the UN with precision. She wanted to make sure she understood correctly. The Zefraxi sovereignty and their allied species had maintained peace for 300 years by agreeing to stop developing weapons. Now they were asking humans to protect them from external threats without actually admitting they needed protection. Jake confirmed that was accurate. They called it a mutual defense advisory role, but yes, they wanted humans to serve as the military deterrent they no longer possessed. Admiral Paul Griffin, who headed UN Space Command, shook his head in disbelief. He said it was absurd that humanity could not be responsible for defending 17 different species across 12 star systems. Earth had exactly 4 deep space-capable warships, including explorers like the Defiant. Dr. Helen Price was the leading expert on alien technology and had been analyzing all the data. She interjected that this was precisely why the aliens were terrified. She told Jake to show the comparison charts again. Jake pulled up holographic displays showing side-by-side comparisons of human and alien technology. The differences were stark. The Zefraxi Eternal Glory had a main reactor producing 4 terawatts. The Defiant ran on 14 terawatts. Actual human military vessels, like the UNS Thunderhead, produced over 50 terawatts. Liu Wei asked about weapons. Jake explained that the most powerful alien plasma cannon operated at 600 megawatts. Human point defense lasers operated at 30 gigawatts. Human railguns delivered kinetic impacts, equivalent to several kilotons of explosives. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the numbers. Someone muttered that humans really were monsters. Jake said firmly that they were not monsters. Just practical. They designed ships for possible interstellar warfare because they did not know what was out there. The aliens designed ships after they had already fought their wars and decided to stop. Admiral Griffin said the aliens wanted humans to be their military because they were too scared to rebuild their own. Dr. Price asked if anyone could blame them. The Zefraxi lost 3 billion people in the expansion wars. Multiple species nearly went extinct. They made a collective decision that preventing another arms race was worth the risk of being vulnerable. It had worked for 300 years. Liu Wei said dryly that it worked until humans showed up. Jake corrected her and said it worked until the Corviniks showed up. That got everyone's attention. Jake pulled up new data and explained that 2 weeks ago, a species called the Corviniks entered Harmony Accord space from the Galactic West. The Corviniks were not part of the Accord and were not interested in joining. They were an aggressive expansionist power with weapons comparable to Accord species, but they actually used them. They had been conquering systems along the rim for the past decade. Admiral Griffin guessed that Accord species could not defend themselves against even these moderately armed aggressors. Jake confirmed that was correct. Grand Admiral Thessar had contacted him directly. The Corvinix issued an ultimatum that 3 systems near the border must submit to their authority within 60 days, or be taken by force. Liu Wei asked what Jake had told him. Jake explained he said he needed to consult with Earth, which was why he was here. The Accord species were asking if humanity would serve as mediators in the dispute. They hoped the Corvinix would be more reasonable if a militarily superior power backed the negotiations. Liu Wei stood and walked to the window overlooking Geneva. She asked if humans were supposed to become the galaxy's police force. Jake said no. They were supposed to become the galaxy's deterrent. There was a difference. If the Corvinix knew that attacking Accord territory meant facing human warships, they would likely back down without anyone firing shots. Admiral Griffin asked what would happen if they did not back down. Jake met his eyes and said then they would have to decide whether they were willing to fight someone else's war to protect species they barely knew. The room erupted in debate. Some argued humanity had no business interfering in galactic politics. Others insisted that having the capability to prevent atrocities created a moral obligation. Still others worried about the precedent if humanity became the military arm of the Accord. After 2 hours of heated discussion, Liu Wei called for order. She told Jake she wanted his personal opinion. He had spent the most time with these species. He had seen their culture and talked to their leaders. Should humanity help them? Jake thought carefully before responding. He said that 3 months ago, he met High Commander Velrax, who was arrogant and condescending with ridiculous threats about weapons that could not hurt a tugboat. But over the following weeks as he got to know the aliens, he realized something. They were not warriors. They were artists, philosophers, engineers, and explorers. They had built a civilization focused on knowledge and beauty and cooperation. They were genuinely committed to peace to the point where they made themselves vulnerable rather than risk returning to the darkness of their past wars. He paused and continued that the Corvinix, based on what they knew, were what the Zefraxi used to be: aggressive, expanding, and seeing military might as the solution to everything. If humans let the Corvinix steamroll the Accord species, they were essentially saying that peaceful civilizations did not deserve protection. That the only way to survive in the galaxy was to be willing to fight. Admiral Griffin pointed out that fighting was sometimes necessary. Jake agreed completely, which was why humanity might be uniquely positioned to help. They understood both perspectives. They had fought terrible wars but also learned to build peace. They could speak the language of both the Accord and the Corvinix. Liu Wei returned to her seat and said the Security Council would need to vote, but she would make her recommendation clear. Jake was ordered to return to Harmony Station and take the Thunderhead with him as a show of force. He was authorized to negotiate with the Corvinix on behalf of Accord species with the goal of achieving peaceful resolution. Jake asked what would happen if negotiation failed. Liu Wei said he was authorized to make it clear to the Corvinix that attacking Harmony Accord territory would be considered an act of aggression against humanity's allies. How he made that clear was left to his discretion. Jake nodded, because it was not quite a declaration that humanity would fight to defend the Accord, but it was close enough to serve as a deterrent. Dr. Price said there was one more thing. They needed to start a technology exchange program immediately. Not weapons technology, but everything else. If Accord species were going to be human allies, they needed to catch up in other areas, like medical technology, industrial capacity, and resource extraction. They needed to make them strong enough that they were not completely dependent on humans. Liu Wei agreed and told them to work with Accord representatives to establish research partnerships. She told Jake that when he delivered their decision to Grand Admiral Thessar, he should make it clear this arrangement was temporary. Humans would help through this crisis, but in the long term, the aliens needed to take responsibility for their own defense. Jake warned that they would not like hearing that. Liu Wei said she did not care if they liked it. The Accord species made a choice to disarm, and that choice had consequences. Humanity did not travel to the stars just to become mercenaries for alien civilizations that were too idealistic to protect themselves. A week later, Jake stood on the bridge of the UNS Thunderhead, which was a proper warship equipped with full combat capabilities. They approached Harmony Station, accompanied by the Defiant and 2 other vessels. Commander Lisa Grant was the Thunderhead's actual captain, and Jake was technically just the diplomatic representative. Grant had been generous about letting him maintain a bridge presence. Amy, who had transferred to the Thunderhead, reported that Accord species had been waiting for them. Grand Admiral Thessar requested an immediate meeting. Jake told her they would dock within the hour and instructed her to send a message to the Corviniks on all standard frequencies. The message should say that humanity had arrived and wished to discuss the border dispute. The message was sent. Jake looked out at the stars and wondered what he had gotten humanity into. They were protectors of species that forgot how to protect themselves. They were peacekeepers in a galaxy that had enjoyed 3 centuries of relative harmony. And potentially they were warriors in a conflict that was not originally their fight. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the galaxy needed someone who understood both peace and war. Someone who could bridge the gap between idealistic Accord species and aggressive Corvaniks. Maybe humanity's unique history of terrible conflicts and hard-won peace made them exactly the right species for this role. Or maybe they were about to make a catastrophic mistake. Jake supposed they would find out soon enough. The Corviniks delegation arrived at the neutral meeting point with 3 warships as escort. The meeting point was an asteroid, carefully positioned between Accord and Corviniks' claimed space. Jake watched from the Thunderhead's tactical display and noted their configuration with interest. He asked Amy for analysis. She reported that the Corvaniks were definitely more advanced than Accord species. Their reactor output was about triple what the Zifroxy managed. Their weapons systems were actual weapons, rather than repurposed industrial tools. She estimated their main cannons ran at about 3 gigawatts continuous output. Commander Grant observed that this was still less than human point defense systems. Amy confirmed it was significantly less, but added that these ships were designed to fight. Unlike Accord vessels, these had actual tactical systems, proper targeting arrays, and redundant power systems. They were real warships, just outdated by human standards. Jake nodded and said this meant the Corvaniks were used to winning. They had been expanding because nobody in this region could stop them. The conversation should be interesting. The meeting was held aboard a small, neutral shuttle that served as a mobile conference room. Jake, Amy, and Commander Grant represented humanity. Grand Admiral Thessar and Ambassador Krell represented the Accord. The Corviniks sent war leader Drax and 2 subordinates. The Corviniks were physically imposing at easily 2.5 meters tall, with heavy exoskeletons and multiple limbs. Drax himself was covered in what appeared to be battle scars. His mandibles clicked together in a way that the translator rendered as aggressive emphasis. Drax began without any greeting and said that humans were the species that had the Accord cowering in fear. Jake said mildly that they preferred to think the Accord was cautiously optimistic about their partnership. He thanked Drax for agreeing to this meeting. Drax said he agreed because he was curious. The Accord species were prey, and had been prey for generations. Suddenly they claimed to have found a predator to protect them. He wanted to see this predator with his own eyes. Jake asked what he thought. Drax's mandibles clicked rapidly, and he said humans looked soft and weak. Their technology was unfamiliar, but that meant nothing because the galaxy was large. Many species developed unusual tools, and it did not make them warriors. Jake said humans did not claim to be warriors. They were explorers, diplomats, and scientists. But they were also capable of defending themselves and their allies when necessary. Drax scoffed at the word allies and said, Accord species were not warriors. They abandoned strength centuries ago and chose weakness while calling it wisdom. Now, they hid behind humans because they were too cowardly to fight their own battles. Thessar's 4 eyes narrowed, but he kept his composure. He said they chose peace over endless conflict, and there was no cowardice in that choice. Drax shot back that there was only cowardice in that choice. He said strength was truth and power was reality. Accord peace was nothing but the absence of anyone strong enough to challenge them until now. Jake interrupted and brought them back to the issue at hand. The three systems the Corvanics demanded were inhabited by Accord species who had no interest in joining the Corvanics collective. They were asking inhabitants to submit or face military action. Drax said he was not asking but informing them of reality. Those systems lay along strategic routes the collective required. Current inhabitants could join peacefully and prosper or resist and be removed. The choice was theirs. Jake asked what would happen if they chose to remain independent and allied with the Accord. Drax said then they chose destruction. His fleet would take those systems in 43 days when the ultimatum expired. Jake leaned back and asked what the war leader would say if humanity considered an attack on Accord territory to be an act of war against them. For the first time, Drax seemed to focus completely on Jake. He said humanity would be foolish if they said that. Humans were one species newly arrived in this region. The Corvanics collective comprised 7 conquered species across 24 systems. They had 60 warships. Humans had 4 vessels that they had detected. Human words were brave, but numbers were weak. Commander Grant said quietly that numbers were not everything. Drax asked what their force strength was then. How many warriors could they field? What weapons did they possess that made them so confident? Jake exchanged glances with Grant and Amy. This was the moment they had discussed, where they had to decide how much to reveal. Not enough, and the Corvanics would dismiss them as bluffing. Too much, and they risked escalating beyond control. Jake told Grant to provide the war leader with their standard vessel specifications, using only public information. Grant pulled out a datapad and slid it across to Drax. She said those were basic capabilities of the UNS Thunderhead, which they traveled in. It was a standard military cruiser in the middle of their fleet, in terms of capability. Drax examined the pad, and his mandibles clicked slowly as he processed information. Then his entire posture changed and became very still. Their reactor output was listed as 53 terawatts, which was 15 times the output of Corvanic's most powerful vessels. Their defensive armor was rated to withstand kinetic impacts at relativistic velocities. Their weapons systems, and he stopped speaking. He looked up at the humans and said, "This was a deception." Amy said it was not, and asked if he would like a demonstration. Drax immediately said yes. He wanted to see these weapons that humans claimed were so superior. Jake nodded and told Commander Grant to have the Thunderhead move to a safe distance from the shuttle. Then they should demonstrate point defense capabilities on the debris field at coordinates marked Delta 7. Grant spoke into her communication unit and relayed the orders. Through the shuttle viewports, they watched the Thunderhead maneuver into position, about 20 kilometers away. The debris field was a cluster of old asteroid fragments from some ancient collision. The largest rock was roughly 100 meters across. Jake emphasized to Grant that they should use point defense only. He specifically said not to show off too much. Grant understood and gave final authorization. The Thunderhead's point defense lasers fired. The demonstration lasted exactly 3.8 seconds. When it was over, the debris field had been reduced to a rapidly expanding cloud of ionized gas and microscopic particles. Drax stared at the empty space where asteroids had been. His mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. He asked quietly if that was their point defense system and not primary weapons. Jake confirmed that was correct. Their primary weapons were considerably more powerful. They also had kinetic railguns, plasma lances, and nuclear munitions, though they preferred not to use the latter, except in extreme circumstances. Drax demanded to see primary weapons. Jake said he did not think that was necessary. He explained that humanity did not want war with the Corvanics collective. They were new to this region, and still learning about galactic politics, but they had committed to defending their Accord allies. If Corvanics attacked those 3 systems, their 2 civilizations would be in conflict, and that benefited no one. Drax was silent for a long moment with his multiple eyes focused on the dissipating cloud. Finally, he spoke and said he needed to consult with the collective council. This changed things. They were prepared to face Accord resistance. They were not prepared to face what he had just seen. Jake told him to take his time. The ultimatum did not expire for 43 days. Perhaps they could find a solution that did not require anyone to fire weapons in anger. After Drax and his delegation left, Thessar turned to Jake, with all four eyes wide. He said, "That was extraordinary." He knew human weapons were powerful, but seeing them demonstrated was different. Jake had just intimidated the most aggressive military power in this sector without firing a shot in combat. Jake said that was the idea. War leader Drax was a warrior who respected strength. If they had just talked about numbers and specifications, he would not have believed them, but actually seeing what human technology could do was a language he understood. Ambassador Krell asked if Jake thought Drax would convince his council to back down. Jake admitted he did not know. Corvanix culture valued strength and conquest. Backing down from a challenge might be seen as weakness, but they were also practical and would not throw away their fleet in a war they could not win. Over the next 42 days, intensive negotiations took place. The Corvanix Council was deeply divided. Some members wanted to call humanity's bluff because they were convinced no species could be as powerful as specifications suggested. Others argued the demonstration proved humanity was exactly as dangerous as they claimed. Jake spent those weeks shuttling between meetings with Corvanix representatives, Accord species, and Earth Command. It was exhausting and frustrating work, but slowly a compromise emerged. The three disputed systems would remain independent and aligned with the Harmony Accord. In exchange, the Corvanix Collective would be granted trading rights and transit permissions through Accord space. This opened new economic opportunities that did not require conquest. Additionally, humanity agreed to establish a permanent diplomatic presence in Corvanix space. There was an implicit understanding that human warships would maintain regular patrols along the border region. It was not a perfect solution. The Corvanix felt they had been forced to back down by superior force. Accord species worried about precedent of allowing the Corvanix any access to their territory. Humanity found itself committed to maintaining military presence in a region they had only learned about months ago. But nobody died. No worlds were invaded. No fleets clashed in battle. On the last day of the ultimatum period, Jake stood on the Thunderhead Bridge as war leader Drax's image appeared on the view screen. Drax said formally that the Corvanix Collective had agreed to proposed terms. They would not attack disputed systems. They would honor trading agreements and transit rights. But they did not forget. Someday, the Corvanix would possess technology equal to humanity's. When that day came, they would revisit this arrangement. Jake said that by that day, perhaps they would all be friends. Technology changed, and power shifted. But relationships built on mutual respect and honest dealing could last. Drax's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. He said Jake was an optimist, and they would see if his optimism was justified. The transmission ended. Jake let out a long breath he had not realized he was holding. Amy asked quietly if they had just prevented a war. Jake said he thought they had. Though to be honest, he was not entirely sure the Corvanix realized they were starting a war they could not win. Sometimes the best way to avoid violence was to make absolutely certain everyone understood the cost. Commander Grant smiled and mentioned the old doctrine of peace through superior firepower. Jake said something like that, though he preferred to think of it as peace through superior demonstration of capability. They did not have to destroy anyone. They just had to prove they could. Over following months, humanity's role in the galactic community evolved. They became the de facto military deterrent for the Harmony Accord, as someone at Earth's UN had predicted. But they also became something more, which was the bridge between peaceful species and aggressive ones. They were translators who could speak both languages. More human ships were dispatched to the region. Diplomatic stations were established. Trade agreements flourished. Slowly and carefully, human engineers began sharing technology with both Accord species and selectively with the Corvanix. Not weapons technology, but everything else, including medical advances, agricultural techniques, materials science, and communication systems. Jake eventually returned to Earth with his mission of first contact complete. But he had left something behind, which was the legacy of humanity's accidental power and proof that sometimes the scariest thing about a species was not how willing they were to fight, but how capable they were of choosing not to. As he filed his final report, Jake included one observation he hoped would guide future relations between humans and aliens. He wrote that they met the galactic community and discovered they were the most dangerous species in the sector. But they also discovered that being dangerous and choosing peace was not a contradiction but a responsibility. Power without wisdom was tyranny. But wisdom without power was vulnerability. Humanity's unique position gave them opportunity to be both strong and kind, both capable and peaceful. They must never forget that their strength existed not to dominate but to protect, not to conquer but to ensure that those who chose peace could live in peace. The report was read by millions across Earth, and later by billions across multiple species. It became something of a founding document for humanity's ongoing role in galactic affairs. On Harmony Station, in a quiet ceremony attended by representatives from 17 different species, a plaque was installed in the main diplomatic chamber. It bore a simple inscription in multiple languages that said, "Humanity was the species that could have conquered, but chose to cooperate instead." It was not quite accurate because humanity had not really chosen anything. They had just stumbled into their role through accident and necessity. But it was the story the galaxy wanted to tell, and it was a story worth living up to. Jake Morrison, retired now from active service but still occasionally consulted on matters involving aliens, would sometimes look at that plaque and laugh. They had met the Galactic Empire and they could not stop laughing at their warships. But in the end, the joke was on everyone, because the galaxy had gained something it had not had in centuries. A species powerful enough to end wars, but wise enough to prevent them. Jake thought that was worth all the confused first contacts, and awkward negotiations, and diplomatic disasters along the way.